Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast, the official podcast of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. This week, we're on location in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, joined by Chairman Representative Bruce Westerman of Arkansas. This week, we're discussing his bill, the American Wildlife Habitat Conservation Act, Resolution 7408, a comprehensive fish and wildlife habitat bill, joined by Federal Policy Director Taylor Schmitz. Let's just jump into it and hear from the chairman himself. Stand by. We're checking in D.C. Let's go. The Sportsman's Voice podcast, the official podcast of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, is on location in Washington, D.C. today. And we are joined by Chairman Bruce Westerman, Chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee and co-chair of the Congressional Sportsmen Caucus. Sir, thanks so much for carving out the time and having us in your home.
Well, Fred, it's great to be here. And you know how much I love to talk about sportsmen's issues, so I didn't have to twist my arm very hard to get me to come talk to you on your podcast about things that are near and dear to all of us.
Now, and I would say this is probably, in my experience of doing this over years, is probably a welcome relief from the day-to-day. This is fun banter. Everybody from sports figures to politicians, you get them away from what's grinding them every day and talk a little turkey or fishing. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, oh, yeah. We were talking earlier. I've got some game cameras up back home, and they send me the pictures, cellular text, right when they take the picture. Turkey season starts next week. And so every time I get that notification from my game camera, my heart races a bit. And it doesn't matter what I'm doing here. I'm like looking at my phone, trying to see what gobbler looked like. Trip the camera or the deer or whatever it was, the wind blowing. But it's that time of year. I love the turkey hunt, and that's where my heart is right now.
Yeah, I think all of us are itching. How is that logistically? Is it easy to check out of here as fast as you can, get back home?
No. Season opens on Monday the 15th in Arkansas. We have votes on Monday night up here in D.C. And I've got to speak at a breakfast Monday mornings. There have been years where I actually killed the turkey and was able to make my flight to get here in time for both. But this year's not one of those. And actually, I'm not going to get to hunt the whole first week, and we've got a late start to the season anyhow, and these turkeys are showing up on my phone taunting me.
How is the we'll get into the substance of the conversation, but I'm curious, how is the turkey population in Arkansas? I know it's challenged in some of the parts of the South.
That's a good question, and our season is shorter. They started on a Monday. You can only kill one gobbler the first week, and I think they're basing this a lot off of harvest levels. I think there's more to it if you dig into it. If you're hunting on private land that's managed, there are a lot of turkeys. Like I'm getting a lot of turkeys on my game camera. Mm-hmm. I've got friends who have property that they've managed that they're covered up with turkeys. But I think it's a case of the vast majority of people that are hunting, or a lot of them are hunting on public lands, and these public lands aren't being managed well. And the numbers are down coming off of public lands, and therefore it looks like the total population's down. I see this with ducks, with deer. It's literally the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come.
That's right.
Where you have good habitat, you're going to have wildlife. Where you do forest management, where you do predator control, the wildlife shows up there. And I can show you pockets where turkeys in Arkansas are as concentrated as I've ever seen them. I've hunted my whole life. And I can show you other areas where historically there's been turkeys, but people aren't hearing turkeys and the numbers that they normally do. So, Yeah, I think the numbers are down, but I think there's more to the story as well.
We're going to get to all of this, I promise you, but this is a great tee up for what we're going to talk about with your legislation and some of the provisions that are in there for this very thing. Private landowners being incentivized how to manage their land for the betterment of the resource of threatened species. So I promise we will get into all of that. I'll put a bow on the turkey talk for a second. So you're challenged to get to Arkansas? Is there any chance you can do any around here, or have you done that around here and kind of moved on?
No, I haven't hunted around here this year. I did make a trip with my friend down to Alabama. Perfect morning in a perfect turkey hunting place, but the turkeys didn't get the memo. There's the story of that's why it's called hunting and not killing.
That's right.
Fishing and not catching, but it's always great to be outside.
For sure. Well, hopefully you find some luck in the limited time you have, but we're appreciative of you doing the good work on behalf of the sportsmen and women of this great country here, even during turkey season. So thanks so much. Taylor, I'm going to throw it to you here and let you and the chairman talk about, I'll address, the importance of your chairmanship with CSC.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time today. And I think we kind of got to this, but you clearly have a passion for the outdoors, whether it's hunting and fishing. But since you've arrived in Congress, you've been a true champion for sportsmen and women. You've been extremely active in the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, and I think you're the only person in the 35-year history of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus that's been the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, as well as the chairman of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus. And recognizing that you're extremely busy, given your chairmanship on the committee, why did you feel that the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus and taking on that leadership role was so important to you? And recognizing that you're spread pretty thin, given your demands up here, but why did you think that was so important to?
Taylor, immediately when I came to Congress, I saw the benefit of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, the largest bipartisan caucus in Congress, and it's focused on things that bring people together. Democrats and Republicans alike like to get out, hunt, and fish, and I think everybody's passionate about our public lands. So, and it fits so great with the Natural Resources Committee and the work that I do on legislation, and the way the chairmanship of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus works is you kind of rotate through, and you start as vice chairman, and it just lined up that when we won the majority and I became chairman of the Resources Committee, was my rotation to roll into the chairman of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus. So kind of like the eclipse back home this past weekend, everything lined up, and it's been magnificent.
Well, we appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for your leadership on the full committee, as well as your leadership in the caucus.
With that, I wanted to continue a small line of thought here, recognizing the size and the bipartisan spirit of the caucus. I'm wondering, sir, when you introduced AWHCA, you had representatives from all over the country, and even out in the island of Samoa, addressing their concerns and how all of this is so important to them. Have you had other members come to you and interested in the caucus for the size and the people it touches, but have a genuine interest to get out and either wet a line or go on a turkey hunt?
Oh yeah, the Democrat co-chair of CSC is Jimmy Panetta, and Jimmy and I are great friends, and we've had a chance to go out with Garrett Graves, who will be the chair next year in the Gulf, pitch red snapper, and Jimmy's also a Razorback fan, so how can you not like him? But there's, like I said, there's interest on both sides of the aisle. There's interest in the Senate, and the American Wildlife Habitat Conservation Act was my version of trying to get a good wildlife habitat bill in place, because we've had RAWA out there that's passed the House, but it's got permanent mandatory spending that's not offset, and that's not going to fly with fiscal conservatives in the House. So I made a commitment to look at a wildlife habitat bill that we could offset the spending, that would be innovative, and it would be focused on wildlife habitat. And it's not focused on wildlife, it's focused on wildlife habitat. And it's, if you want to recover wildlife, the main thing you can do is create the habitat where they can thrive. And I don't care if it's game species or if it's endangered species or listed species, the number one thing we can do is put good habitat on the ground. And that's good for all species across the board. It's good for not only animal species, but also plant species. We've got a lot of native species that have been suppressed because we've got overgrown forest. And when you open those forests up, let the sunlight hit the ground, use a controlled burn to get that leaf duff off of the floor, it's amazing what grows up. And it's amazing how God put the right food for the animals in the right place.
Almost by design.
They flock to that.
Yeah.
Literally, and it's not a question of, is this something you can repeat scientifically? It's been repeated so many times, and it goes back to our conversation earlier. There are turkeys in Arkansas where there's land management. There are ducks in Arkansas where there's management. In my home state, we used to have buffalo and elk. And that land base, same amount of land, supported a lot more diversity of species, and it did it with natural vegetation. But the Native Americans managed it much different than it's being managed now. We know what to do. We know the right thing to do. We've just got to do it. And that's what the American Wildlife Habitat Conservation Act is all about. It's getting management on the ground. It's focusing federal funds, not on some bureaucracy here in D.C., but giving funding to state game and fish agencies who know how to manage better in their state than anybody else does, who work with NGOs and other groups, nonprofits, and have the expertise and the capability to manage both public lands and private lands. And that's what I'm so excited about Wildlife Habitat Conservation Act, is because we utilize an authority called the Good Neighbor Authority, where we let state game agencies go in and manage on federal lands. Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service is a new authority that we're creating where we've got Good Neighbor there. And I base this off of some ground truthing that happened there in my state in the Ouachita National Forest, where they were trying to create habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker. And this was the Forest Service trying to do this. And these guys did what you should do. They went and did their research, and they read the journals of the earliest European explorers who went through that area that wrote in their journal, you could ride through the forest on a horse at an open gate. Well, if you look at most forests on federal lands now, you would have a hard time leading a horse through the forest because it's so overstocked and overgrown. And it described this open savanna type forest. And that's when we had buffalo and elk and abundance of everything. So the Forest Service went in, they thinned the forest, introduced controlled burns. And guess what? They're trapping red cockaded woodpeckers off of these sites and taking them to other sites where they're doing the same kind of work. And it's been done with longleaf and wire stem grass down on the coastal plain. It's shortleaf pine and blue stem grass ecosystem there where I live. And not only did the red cockaded woodpecker populations increase, but other songbird populations went up. A lot of birds that we care about, their populations went up. Quail. When I was a kid in Arkansas, you could go quail hunting anywhere. And now if you see a covey of wild quail, you're like, oh my goodness, there's a covey of quail somewhere. But the quail population went up, the turkey population went up, the deer population went up. The plant biodiversity went through the roof because you had all these species that have been subdued where the seeds couldn't germinate and grow. So it's a win-win situation. And through all of that, the Forest Service was able to take the timber they harvested, they sold it, and they used that money to do the conservation work. So we've put that ability in the Wildlife Habitat Conservation Act for the state agencies to go do management on federal lands. And if they sell timber, they take that money and put it back into the fund to do more habitat work. So if you just look roughly at the numbers, and I'll again use Arkansas for an example, under RAWA, the $1.3 billion per year mandatory spending, Arkansas is going to get about 13 to 14 million. Under America's Wildlife Habitat Conservation Act, they'll get 3 to 4 million. But to do a rough back of the napkin calculation, the potential by managing these federal lands and selling the timber, they could easily generate 20 to up to 40 or more $million a year. And it's perpetual because you do the management, you move to another spot, and by the time you get through the forest, you come back to where you started and you can just do it all over again. So from a fiscal standpoint, this is a great way to do it. And then when you talk about private lands, you've got a lot of small landowners that they have land because they want to hunt on it. And they don't really care about timber production, but they do want wildlife habitat. So now you'll have these state agencies where the landowner can call them and say, hey, I've got 80 acres that I want to get more wildlife on it. And they can send a biologist and a forester out and look at it and say, they'll write a prescription, you do this and the wildlife are going to come. And, we estimate you've got $15,000 worth of timber on this property, and it's going to cost $12,000 to do the work. We'll hire the contractors, come in and do the work. We'll sell this timber. We'll pay our expenses, and the landowner is going to get the extra $3,000. Or maybe it's $15,000 worth of timber, and it costs $20,000. And they tell the landowner, you can sell this timber to pay for the work, and then it's going to cost you another $5,000. I'm confident people will jump on that. And if we can do management on private lands and help these landowners with the assistance they need, because a lot of them they don't know what they need to do with the land. They just know they want more wildlife on it. So create a program where you put seed money in it. And, a lot of people, they manage their land and they do it for economic reasons. There's no reason it should cost the taxpayer to manage public land. I mean, these public lands have the potential to pay for themselves. Private lands have the potential to pay for themselves if you're smart about how you go in and manage.
So the audience should know, too, that the chairman speaks from a place of authority as a forester by trade, yes? So he's not just throwing this stuff together and articulating some very poignant thoughts and numbers here. He does it. He knows exactly what he's talking about.
I have a license to practice engineering and a license to practice forestry, and I keep those licenses up to date. So I've still got my stamp. I could write a forest plan and stamp it and be legal by the state. But a lot of this is just common sense. And I got the great fortune to go to school and study forestry and to work in that field some. But this isn't rocket science, and it's not some new thing that we've discovered. We've got decades and centuries of data showing us that this stuff works.
So as you're saying this, I'm thinking all these different thoughts, and I want to dial in on this. And it's not to be negative, but, kind of where do we go wrong? Because you're right. There's decades and decades of data, and then through tradition that was able to become, data points at some point is that we can go back and study. So there was a habit and a tradition of this somewhere in the past, and we lost our way for it's common sense to us sitting here at this table. We understand it, but the great many of the folks outside these buildings, they don't. And when you look at some people and say, well, I want to harvest your timber for the reasons you just espoused, I think a lot of people, and especially my generation, mid 40s and maybe a little younger, that came up in this Captain Planet type environment on TV, see cutting trees is a horrible thing. And why would you want to set fire to the ground? And it's a hard thing for them to reconcile, and never mind try to get them in one spot to have this conversation and give them what you just gave us in 7 minutes.
One of the sayings I've coined here since I've been in Congress is that we've loved our trees to death. We love them so much that we don't do what's good for them. And the same people that say don't cut a tree, also it was a mentality really going back to the 90s is where this really started. Was even way before that, our federal land agencies thought we should put every fire. But at one point we harvested timber and we put fires out, which is not as bad. But when you stop harvesting timber and you keep putting fires out, you're on a collision course for bad things to happen. And we're seeing that. The number of catastrophic wildfires is going up exponentially. We've seen years where we've lost over 10 million acres of land. And there's a better way to do it. I've had the good fortune in this job to be able to travel a lot and see a lot of different landscapes across the country. And one that just vividly sticks in my mind, I was out in New Mexico and I got a chance to visit the Mescalero Apache tribal lands. And I've hunted elk, but I'm not a huge elk hunter, but I didn't realize that I was going into like elk mecca there. But what I did realize when I drove onto this property, it's like textbook ponderosa pine landscape. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. It's like you could take pictures of this and just put it in a forestry book. And talking to the tribal forest managers, it was a great source of pride for them that they'd carried on these traditions, that they had this great landscape, and they had massive record elk out there on their reservation. So we visit that, and then we go down the road, like, 10 or 15 miles, and we visit the Lincoln National Forest. Same landscape, same climate conditions, same topography, same plant species. It's a moonscape. A literal moonscape from a fire that wrecked it many years ago, and nothing was growing back. All it was dead snags and shrubbery. And I thought, what greater contrast than to go down the road and see where the Apache managed this land and how intact it is, how much wildlife is there, and you come up the road where we took this hands-off approach and nature managed it. It burned it all to the ground. And some of these fires get so hot they sterilize the soil. And you can't even get natural regeneration, which is the way we plant a lot of trees now, but long before humans started planting trees, they reproduced the old-fashioned way. They dropped seeds on the ground and they sprouted. There's so much high ground out there in front of us. There's so many good things we can do. We know how to do it. And my work in Congress is focused on creating the environment where we can get this work done. And I think people would just be amazed. Probably in a fairly short amount of time, we could do this management on the federal lands. These hunters and outdoorsmen would be beside themselves.
So, Mr. Chairman, when I look at your bill, I see the overarching goal is habitat, and I see primarily two ways to get there, right? And that's flexibility, and that is resources and partnerships with our private landowners and our state agencies. You highlighted two national forests that are managing their forests very, very differently. One in your home state, which I've had the privilege to hunt for bobwhites. And I remember going there and saying, why are they cutting all this timber? And they were doing it for red-cockaded woodpecker. And it was amazing. I still use those pictures on my phone every single time I'm in DC here talking about active forest management and the benefit of those programs. And to people that don't understand or don't necessarily agree with where we're at on things. But I think one question I have is, how do we have such differences of opinion and management practices amongst our Forest Service managers? And how can this bill help address some of that? And I think from where I sit, it's a couple of reasons. You have folks that are scared of litigation in terms of Forest Service managers. You have folks that have fundamental disagreements in terms of how we should manage our forests, and they also don't have the resources to do it. But how does your bill help kind of change some of those mentalities and perspectives?
Well, I would say when you get out on the public lands and you're visiting with a lot of the local land managers, you're going to see a couple different. Now, in Arkansas, we were fortunate to have some research scientists and some field foresters working on the Ouachita and the Ozark who are we were foresters, guys with PhDs in forestry. And if we were sitting around the table talking, our stories would be the same: manage the forest. And then I think one of the problems with our federal land managers is you've got a lot more ologists in there than you've got foresters.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I don't think people fully understand the benefits of forest management. And every decision is a management decision. I've said this so many times. When you say we're going to be hands off and not touch it, you just made a management decision, because forests are dynamic. They change. They're going to keep growing. They're going to fill the growing space. They're going to compete for sunlight. They're going to compete for nutrients. And eventually, some of them are going to give up and get weak and die, and insect disease are going to attack them. And that's when they're primed for wildfire. And we've seen that cycle over and over and over. But good forest management is where you work with nature and you go in and you thin out the low value stuff and leave the high value. And over time, the whole forest becomes a higher value. And when I say value, I'm talking about quality of trees and health of trees. And you're always focused on the future. What's going to keep this forest healthy? How do you make sure you've got the natural regeneration, the wildlife habitat? And man, if we can just get that message out, and people will understand all the research, the reams and volumes of research that we've got, it's a no-brainer.
In the remaining time we have, I do want to get to two more questions. I want to address, in your bill, there is a focus on Endangered Species Act type language, making that better, improving that. Can you speak to that? And also, as we all know, and you've addressed before, that there's a problem with the ESA, and I think we've touched on it on this program in the past, that well-intended, it's got a really bad track record of getting things done. I think we're 3% of recovery rate on species, and then preservationists take control of it and use it as a means of protecting a certain species in perpetuity, greater Yellowstone grizzly, and so on. Can you speak to some of that, the highlights there?
Yeah, and again, a very well-intentioned law it did some great things. The eagle, the grizzly bear, you got some iconic success stories with the ESA, but it's turned into what we call Hotel California, where you can come but you can't leave. And once you get on the list, as you mentioned, only 3% of the species that have ever been listed have been deemed recovered. And if you read the enabling language for the Endangered Species Act, it was to recover species. Like, the act is failing at its own stated objectives when it was enabled. Couldn't be much more successful, but again, it comes back to habit. And you see, and you can't just oversimplify this, but the first thing that happens when a federal agency sees some listed species, it's like, put this invisible fence around it, do not touch this area. They don't go back and look and say, here's what the habitat for this species is, and our best chance of recovering the species is to create better habitat for it. It's hands off. We're going to protect it. We just made a management decision. It's a bad management decision, but they're also doing that because of threat of litigation and all the other things that are enabled through the Endangered Species Act. What we want to do with the Wildlife Habitat Conservation Act is focus on the habitat and recovering species, getting them off of the endangered species list, making it the success that it should be. And the Endangered Species Act lacks in establishing what parameters mean that something's recovered. So we're going to try to define that. And we're also going to make it where that if you're doing active management for habitat and a species shows up on your land, like if you're a private landowner right now, it's like, oh my gosh, throw your hands up. We got to get away from this. That's not good for the species. So we want them to be able to continue managing the habitat so that the species has a better chance when they're found. It's just common sense stuff. Not doing away or abolishing a bedrock environmental law. making the law actually work for its intended purpose.
I love that. Great. Kind of a general question, but I want to give you the opportunity to speak directly to sportsmen and women of this great country. And, sportsmen and women out there on the landscape, we see good legislation get presented. We see it get held hostage. Special interests are not reaching the finishing line given the challenges we have here in this town. Last year, there were thousands of bills that were introduced in the House and the Senate. Only 27 of those became law. Of those, 2 of those were top priorities for Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation: Protecting Hunting Heritage and Education Act and the Duck Stamp Modernization Act. This represents about 7.5% of the bills that were signed into law in 2023.
Maybe that.
That was that's you there, sir.
That's right.
Quite a feat, obviously. However, there are plenty more out there that are bipartisan, common sense bills that are getting tied up for various reasons. American men and women out on our landscape just get so frustrated and wring their hands, and they want to know, can someone just speak for us? You're doing it here with what you presented here, but some of the other stuff.
I always tell people, if you think you're frustrated, come walk in my space. And we had a great success this week. We've got a bill called the Explore Act. It's the first big outdoor recreation bill that Congress has ever passed, focused solely on outdoor recreation, which has a lot of good things for hunting and fishing in it, and all outdoor activities. And it was so fun to do it because it's bipartisan, and we had I think 12 different pieces of legislation that we rolled into one bill that we called the Explore Act. It's got great bipartisan support. We passed it out of the committee on voice vote, had it on the floor on Tuesday. It passed the House floor on voice vote. And this isn't like your normal little suspension bill. This is some pretty substantial legislation that's going to be very important to outdoor recreation. But it just, again, shows on these issues, if you work across the aisle and you listen, that there's a lot of things to be agreed upon. And this bill has a great chance of passing the Senate and getting signed into law. The Senate's already done work on an outdoor recreation package, and I'm excited to see it cross the finish line. So, and CSF has been a supporter of that too. So hopefully we can put another mark on the chalkboard for CSF and supporting legislation.
Well, hopefully so. And we certainly look forward to the opportunity to follow up with you and have you back on the program to talk about that very success that we're looking forward to. In respect to your time, sir, we're going to go ahead and put a bow on it. Thank you so much. I know you're very busy and have other obligations today. Continued success. We look forward to working with you. Obviously, you and Taylor have a great relationship, and happy turkey hunting when you can get out.
I appreciate that and appreciate all the good work that you all do. And it's an honor to get to be in this position and for this time. And I'm excited to keep working for our great American outdoors and for sportsmen and women.
Thank you. Fantastic, Chairman. Thanks so much to Chairman Westerman for his time. Obviously, there's so many media requests to all of our elected officials down there on the Hill. He and his staff were able to provide us that time there that you just heard. And, we're thankful for it, and we're thankful for his leadership and hearing why, the CSC, the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus there, on the federal side is so important, and getting his firsthand account of why it's important to him, and always good to hear that. It's nice to know that we have that representation down on the Hill, and turkey hunter too. So get no complaints from me. Always love when you can connect with somebody on that level and celebrate those things that we have in common, and ultimately we're just people at the end of the day, and we've said that before here. I've said that before. Hunting, fishing, turkey hunting especially, the great equalizer. You can have someone like Chairman Westerman, Justice Scalia in his time, and then you can have me. And we get out there and enjoy the spring, and we're all the same. But it's when it comes to the business side of things, it's good to know that somebody down there, and a great many somebodies, CSC boasting over 250 members large, as the largest bipartisan bicameral caucus on the Hill. Definitely a feather our cap and a feather in their cap, and certainly great many of them are proud members of that caucus, and we thank them for their leadership, especially Chairman Westerman. So I hope you all enjoyed that since then, and if you listened to our weekly Sportsman's Voice Roundup, the every Wednesday offering, our news edition of the program last week, and we announced last week that House Natural Resources Committee passed Chairman Westerman's bill. So good news there. Certainly information only at this point still has to continue the process, but positive steps in an election year where everything is contentious, everything is party line driven. And if you're watching the news at wherever you get your news, whether it's traditional media or you're scrolling through your social feeds and just keeping up with the news of the day, things are not normal out there. And when it comes to outdoor pursuits, I wish more people would latch on to that and find peace, find normalcy in such normal, natural activities and environment. Something we can all get behind, whether you are taking game or fish or just enjoying putting your feet in the grass. We all got in that common. I can't think of one person that I know that doesn't want to go out and feel some sunshine on their face or go to a water's edge and just enjoy. So anyway, all that said, thank you again to Chairman Westerman. Thank you to Taylor for bringing me down there and introducing me to some folks and lending his expertise to the conversation as well. So as always, every Wednesday, folks, TSB Roundup, like I said, our news cast, if you will, for the week. We bring you articles and a little deeper dive from all across the country. We feature our lead article author, bring them on so you can hear from them. And that's every single Wednesday. And obviously our every other Thursday offering. Subscribe, rate where available, pass it along to your friends, family, put it in your social feed. Super easy. Find the 3 dots, copy the link, drop it in there. We appreciate the support. That's it. Turkey hunting's still going on. It's opening up here in the Northeast, and it's a great time of year. So with all that, we'll see you in a couple Thursdays for this feature product, and then we'll see you next Wednesday as we, again, as always, bring you the news of the day. Thanks so much for bringing us along your day. We appreciate the support. Until next time, see you later. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.